Welcome to the Cinema Composite podcast. I am Dan Larson, and I'm joined by my good friends here, Tom Ward and Matt Schmitz. How you guys doing?
Good.
Yeah?
Good.
Yeah.
Excited to be doing this.
All right. Well, today we're doing a full retrospective on the last decade of movies, 2010 through 2019. Are you guys excited?
Yeah, except it just makes you realize how old we've gotten in 10 years.
And how many movies we watched.
Okay, what we're going to do is the three of us have all compiled a top 10 list of movies, our favorite 10 movies from the last decade. We have not shown it to each other yet, so we want to have some surprises. We'll allow for each person to kind of talk about their favorites, why they love them so much. Before we get to that, though, I'd love to get just your thoughts, overall thoughts of the decade. What were the trends? What will it be remembered for? I mean, for me, I think obviously a big one is domination of franchises and superhero movies in general. Just having that IP, getting people to these big blockbusters, that's what it'll probably be remembered for.
Yeah, and one of my things that I kind of made note of was this was the decade that Disney bought everything that you were seeing,
That's true.
I mean, they technically bought Marvel in 2009, but it was literally the very end of the year. And then we had Star Wars, Lucasfilm, and then they bought out Fox just earlier this year. So They really kind of own everything now.
They've got Indiana Jones and they haven't even touched on it yet. I'm still waiting for that.
Yeah, and well, it's also interesting because we also saw the rise of streaming services, you know, and that kind of changed the definition of what counted as a movie, and so now we have an absurd amount of Netflix original movies that showed up this year, and it's crazy that there's just this much out there for you to watch.
And sort of touching back with how you were saying with franchises, and really the superheroes are the genre of this decade. Like, it's our cowboys, gangsters, if you will. Like, every decade sort of has a thing. This is definitely the superhero one. And I know you're probably against that, but I would argue more that it's nor good or bad. It's just, it is what the decade is.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's fair.
I would say a big concern with this decade was the decline of the mid-budget adult movie. Someone said, like, all movies are either $200 million blockbusters or $2 million indie movies. And that's definitely been true recently. I would say the streaming services have brought a lot of those mid-budget movies back. People like Scorsese and Baumbach and all these directors who kind of worked in that middle range have gone to streaming services, which I think is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's bizarre to think of someone like Scorsese who, is this titan of the industry doing something for Netflix, or like with Netflix. It's bizarre.
One other just kind of trend I've noticed is really the democratization of filmmaking. Film technology and equipment has gotten cheaper over the years, and I've definitely viewed a lot more films from countries I wouldn't have necessarily watched 10 years ago. I just watched a movie from Senegal, and a streaming service, something like that, really brings that kind of movie into the forefront.
You also, it's easier for people to go out and make movies. The big example being Sean Baker with Tangerine, who shot it on 3 iPhones, and Soderbergh has done it with iPhones now too. It's like, it's crazy that everyone now can make their own movie with just a phone.
It's more so that the technology is available to do it on your phone. But also, I feel like Netflix and those, they have so much money, they don't know what to do. Like, if you have an idea, it's like, here, take $1 million and make something that someone can binge.
Yep, and that bubble's definitely going to burst at some point. But for now, it's been a good process.
I said we ride it as long as we can. Why not?
Right. All right, so I want to switch to more personally. In the last 10 years, what's been your relationship to movies in this decade?
This past decade, we graduated from high school, and it was kind of post-high school that I really started seeking out movies rather than just going to see what was available, maybe a little before the beginning of this decade. But, I started paying more attention to who was working behind the camera, While I knew directors beforehand, it was when I started watching directors to see what they do in the future, not just, I liked his last movie, I'll go see this one. So that really kind of changed how I approached movies now. And
that's basically sort of my deal with high school. I just watched whatever there was, and then we all graduated in 2010, all three of us here, and I enjoyed movies. I didn't think that I would pick it as a minor in college, which I'm glad I did, because it did get me into more people. I wouldn't have watched Kurosawa or anything like that without that. And then I don't think I even really started watching even more like current day movies, because I always liked older movies, sometimes not the best ones, sort of like B movies and stuff like that. But when we did Watch It or Don't, that's when I really started looking at movies, I think, a little bit more. That's when I was really keeping track of what I've watched, how I would rate it, and sort of stuff like that.
Yeah, for those who don't remember, the three of us were part of a short-lived YouTube series called Watch It or Don't, where we tried to watch recent releases and give a little review. That was like 2015 or so we did that.
We've learned since then, hopefully.
It was pretty much anything we could get a pre-screen or two.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically.
Just to reflect on what you guys said too, I mean, it was a decade of transitions for all of us. We finished college, learning more about film. I took a film studies class in college that was super helpful just to, understand what goes into reviewing film, but also what goes into making films and appreciating the full spectrum of the kinds of films that are out there. So let's get into the top 10. And the way we're going to do this, we'll each kind of go around in a circle going, I'll share my 10, you share your 10, and we'll keep going down. My guess is we'll probably have some overlap between a few films. When that happens, I'd like to keep the conversation going. If I have something at 10, you have it at 4, you just jump in and talk about it too, and we'll skip your 4 when we get there. Who wants to start?
I will hop in.
All right. So Tom, what is your 10th best film of the 2010s?
So my number 10 spot goes to Birdman by Iñárritu.
Okay.
That was one that when I saw it, I immediately loved it. There's something just so weird and dreamlike about it, and Keaton is just an absolute star. It's kind of one that I think about, after the fact, and I think, oh, is it really as good as I remember it? And then every time I've seen it since, it really is that good. And it's very much an experience.
It's the Rope of 2014, if you will. But I liked it because I feel like Michael Keaton had been missing. The only other thing I can think of him for that decade where he stands out, other than Spotlight is a big one, but like The Other Guys is one that
he's great in that movie.
Sort of makes me laugh, but I just love him. So from Batman to Birdman, I'm a big fan of that just by itself.
Absolutely, I agree. It's nice to see that he's got some of his star power back.
I would agree on Birdman. When I first saw it, I was just mesmerized by not only the camera work, but the story in general. And that style has been parodied or copied a lot more since then. But at the time, it was definitely completely novel. All right, Matt, what is your number 10?
I can jump in there. I feel like you guys would agree the 10 is the hardest one.
It really is.
To like figure out where are we going to cut the line here. So I went with one that was a little bit more fun. And it's mainly because I didn't think I would enjoy it as much as I did. So that's why I went with 2015's Creed.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was. I was not expecting it. I'm a pretty good fan of the Rocky movies. They're pretty good movies, and it's Ryan Coogler, and I absolutely love Michael B. Jordan, who I can't wait to see what he also goes on to do. And it's just how it's filmed is not like any other boxing movie I've seen.
That's true.
And so that in itself, it made me care about boxing more than I thought I could. And I just was not expecting it to be that good. And it showed both the director and its star that I think are going to go on to much bigger and greater things.
I mean, they already pretty much have.
Yeah, they have.
But even more so.
Yeah.
I'm famously indifferent towards Rocky, much to the internet's chagrin. But I agree. I really enjoyed Creed, and that's coming from someone who really does not enjoy watching boxing. It definitely stands out.
Yeah, I would say if I was going to rank my movies based on the expectations I had going into them and how they surpassed that, Creed is definitely up there. Like, that is a movie that didn't need to be good at all, and it's pretty great. So then my number 10, I went back and forth a lot on. I think I switched it out 4 times in like the last week or so, but I went with more of a guilty pleasure, and that is from 2016, Sing Street.
Oh, that's fun.
Directed by John Carney. He also directed one of my favorite films, Once, which I would have put in my top 10 from the last decade. Like Once, I've watched this movie a lot.
More than once.
More than once. And I've probably seen it like 6 times or so. And it's just like, it's a movie that just makes me feel so good. It's a coming of age movie. It's got great music. It's set in Dublin in the 80s. It's about a kid, forming a band and trying to get the girl. It just like ultimately captures the feeling of being like 15 or 16. You know, your parents don't quite understand you. You're trying to get the girl. You're making music with your friends. There's some great performances in it. Jack Rayner is the older brother, and he's so good in that. There are a couple songs and sequences in it that are just like, I'll go on YouTube and watch clips of it all the time. So yeah, Sing Street, number 10.
Yeah, I absolutely can understand that. It really is just absolute fun. you really enjoy watching it.
All right, so that was our 10. Tom, you want to start off with 9?
Okay, my number 9 spot is the Grand Budapest Hotel by Wes Anderson.
Any overlap there?
Yeah, I do have that on my
Okay.
list. I do.
So, I mean, Wes Anderson is kind of one of those guys where if you like him, if you like him, you like him. And Grand Budapest is him at his most Wes Anderson.
On steroids.
Yeah, and it really is just a near perfect film. It's got a lot of great performances, particularly Ray Fiennes. He's absolutely flawless, and really good music. It is just a wonderful adventure.
It's as perfect as the symmetry of his shots. Like, it's just everything about it is him 100%, and it all works. It's a great story, great cast.
So, Matt, it sounds like you have it on your list. Why don't you talk about it right now, too? What number you have it at?
'Cause I have it at my number 2.
Okay.
Sorry to do that to you.
I absolutely love it.
Go for it. Talk about
it. It's beautiful. The colors, I know it's funny for me to say that being colorblind, but like there's some oranges and browns in there that it's like colors you don't usually see. And it's not like you could get mad about certain things. I know because I was a history major, I get annoyed by certain like historical things, but it's like, it's a fantasy world. I get what he's trying to play for sometimes with what's going on, but like, you don't need any of that. You can just enjoy this really weird story with great characters that are perfectly cast. And I lost my mind. I loved it. I must have watched it. I've seen it at least 15 times, and usually with someone that's never seen it before, someone that wouldn't necessarily like Wes Anderson, and everyone that I've walked away seeing it with have really enjoyed it. So I think that's special.
Yeah, I would say it's probably his funniest movie. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would say that.
All right, so Matt, I know you just talked, but let's do your number 9.
Sure, absolutely. My number 9 is one of those movies that, people, it's the kind of movie that you really like, even though you might not like to enjoy it because it's really sort of depressing or sad. But I have Manchester by the Sea.
Okay.
I have that as
not on my list. Tom, and you?
On your list?
Okay,
Oh,
nope.
okay.
Nope, not on mine.
All right. I was not expecting that movie at all. Like, its plot, like it was, there's a part in that movie, I'm not going to spoil it for you, that's just like absolutely devastating, and how it's filmed is phenomenal. Again, that is the only negative I can say about it, is that it's not one you're going to be like, oh, let's throw on Manchester by the Sea. But if you get the chance to see it, I highly recommend it. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, I think it's great too. I think what you just said might be the reason I don't love it.
Okay.
Is because I never want to watch it again. It's so affecting and emotional that it's just like, I just need to get away from it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's an incredible movie. It's heartbreaking. I think it is in my top 25 for the decade, but didn't quite make it to the top 10.
My number 9 is If Beale Street Could Talk from 2018. This was a very late addition to my list. I watched this movie 2 days ago as a rewatch. I'd only seen it one time because it only came out last year. And I loved it when it came out, but I was a little hesitant to put it in the top 10 just because I usually like to see at least one more time. But after a rewatch, it moves up to 9. If Beale Street Could Talk, directed by Barry Jenkins. He also directed Moonlight. Moonlight is definitely the more praised film, and I totally get that. It's a very technical film. It won Best Picture, obviously. And I really liked Moonlight a lot, but Beale Street just kind of hit me harder. Something about the characters and the style of the movie, I was just floored from the beginning, and I cried multiple times. Barry Jenkins is so sensual in his filmmaking, and I don't mean that in like a romantic sense, but in how you can almost feel everything on the screen.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The cast in this is really tremendous. Obviously the leads are great, but there's a deep bench of this cast. And on the rewatch, I had forgotten how many great actors just show up for one or two lines. Brian Tyree Henry's scene is like the shortest scene in the movie, basically, but it's so powerful, and it kind of encapsulates the entire thesis of the movie, and it's so good. On top of that, it's probably my favorite score of the decade.
Yeah.
Scored by Nicholas Britell, who also scored possibly my favorite TV show of the decade, Succession. So good job, Nicholas Britell. But If Beale Street Could Talk, just a wonderful movie.
Yeah, and I haven't seen it since we saw it in the theater, and I kind of had the same reaction to it. It was one where I have a tough time deciding if it's better than Moonlight. Mm-hmm. And I think on a personal level, for me, it is.
Yeah, it didn't get a lot of play last year in terms of awards or box office, at least compared to Moonlight. I think over time, people will come to appreciate it at that level.
I've only seen it the once. I do want to see it again, but my big takeaway was that I did enjoy the soundtrack. I do think I prefer just off the time I've only seen each one once. I do prefer Moonlight.
That's fair.
To it.
I think most people do.
And beyond that, it also beat La La Land. That's just another little dig I'll like to throw out there.
Okay. All right, let's move on to number 8. Tom, what is your number 8 film?
I have Dunkirk, which we actually just talked about a little before we were recording this. I like Nolan mostly. I think he's always good, sometimes really great. For me, the word that describes Dunkirk best is pure. It's a pure war film. You know, it's not going for anything other than what it is. And, you know, you have nameless performers in it. You're nameless characters. And you see the absolute sprawling nature of it. And once again, Tom Hardy, you don't even see his face, and it doesn't matter because what you have is just this, I assume 2 hours. I didn't look it up, but, you know, 2 hours of just...
I think it's only like an hour and a half. It's really tight.
Perfect. Yeah. And, you know, it's to the point where I actually can't tell how long it is because it is so wonderfully perfect.
So my only disagreement with that is that as much as I do enjoy it for those reasons you said, and as tight as it may be, I'm not thrilled with how it's edited.
Interesting.
And I think that is more so... Again, being sort of the history snob, is that not many people know that story. And I know a lot of people that did go to see it that really enjoyed it. And they were a little confused and a little lost. Why is it like this? So it was confusing, I think, to some people. Mm-hmm. Like, you kind of already had to have a little bit of a knowledge going in of what was going on, I thought personally. But that's my only negative.
I would agree with that, but I would also say the main point of Dunkirk was we need to get these people home. This is a rescue mission. That came across so well, and the way he edited it makes the movie move and feel so different and awesome than your typical war movie.
Yeah, I actually think the editing was a very clever way to do it because it would have felt very weirdly paced to have it, you know, all play out in sequence.
It was also a great movie to see in the theaters with your dad, Tom.
Yeah.
One of the...
Shout out to Matt Ward.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm sure he'll listen.
So my number 8 movie on my list is Hereditary.
Okay.
Sort of the horror movie that I've chose for the decade.
You are a horror movie expert.
I'd like to think of the panel, I'm the horror movie expert. I'd like to think so.
You definitely watch the most.
I've watched the most.
You don't necessarily watch the best.
Yeah, but that's part of the genre.
Yeah, that's fair.
You know what I mean? You got to take the good with the bad. This was sort of one of the horror movies that I think one of the reasons why it was special is that I think it was all 3 of us that were together when we saw it in the theater. Which was one of my favorite like movie going outing experiences because the whole audience, like, you could just feel the room either be in panic or like laughing nervously, or someone came running in at the beginning of it that kind of scared the audience, and it was hilarious. But then recently rewatching it with my wife, who was terrified of the concept because she's not a fan of any type of possession movies. We watched it in the middle of the day. So seeing it under that lens, I really enjoyed it more. And there's just so many sequences, without getting into spoilers, that really just stick with you, I feel like. And there hasn't been a horror movie like that in a long time without it being, you know, just sort of dumb, if you will.
Yeah, director Ari Aster, he's shown that he's very talented with Midsommar in this.
I mean, I was like literally leaning forward in my seat for the last half hour of the movie. And it's just, there's no sort of reprieve from like just the absolute terror.
Mm-hmm. All right, my number 8, I don't think either of you have seen this one. So it's kind of
make
fun.
it an interesting discussion.
Yeah. It is from 2017 by Sean Baker, The Florida Project.
This is actually one of the ones of the decade that I am most upset that I did not see.
So Sean Baker is the director. His films kind of make a commitment to showing sides of America that aren't typically seen on screen. This centers around people in our country who aren't quite homeless, but they're living basically week to week in these motels in not great conditions. They're just trying to get by. And this movie follows a young single mom and her 6-year-old daughter. It's really about how the American dream has failed these kids. And it's ironic because the motel in the movie is just on the outskirts of Disney World. So you have the happiest place on earth and then this just really terrible situation. What I think works so well, it's going to sound weird, but it's that all the characters are really pretty terrible. The mom is a terrible mom. She's selfish. She's immature. She does things that are pretty terrible. And the kids, even though they're kids, they're up to no good. They're getting into all the sorts of trouble. They're annoying. But even with all of that, you still really care for these characters. And the end, I don't want to spoil it, but it's very emotional. I cried both times that I saw it. It just speaks to how good the direction is of this movie. And even though you don't relate to them in any way, really, you come to just be on their side. To top it off, Willem Dafoe is in this movie, and he gives one of his best performances, and I love Willem Dafoe. It just makes the movie just that much better, and I highly recommend you guys watch it.
Yeah.
Is he a Willem to friend or foe in this movie?
He's definitely more of a friend.
Okay, well, that's good. I appreciate that. I do know that it's on Amazon Prime streaming
is
right
it?
now.
Okay.
And I will make that my next project to watch.
Oh, very good.
Boo.
I know.
All right, number 7. Tom, why don't you kick us off?
So my number 7, I think I probably had a much stronger reaction to than you guys, and I think probably most people. But I have Phantom Thread.
Ah.
And
I thought one of you would have it.
yeah, I mean, P.T. Anderson, he came out this decade with The Master, Inherent Vice, and Phantom Thread. I definitely think that Phantom Thread is his best of the decade. It's kind of like Birdman. It's actually just very dreamlike, except it dips a little more into a bit of a nightmare, I think. And there's nothing particularly exciting or interesting about the plot, but you still just get so fixated on these characters, this guy who's a genius, but really, really terrible. And then you have this essentially unknown actress who's going toe-to-toe with Daniel Day-Lewis, and she is just as captivating. And the score is beautiful. The cinematography, which was P.T. Anderson shot himself, and it just is absolutely stunning.
I personally went into it with low expectations because I did not like Inherent Vice. And how you basically just said the story, you're not really rooting for him in any way. And I wouldn't say it's a story that's fun to watch, but sort of the pain and getting to enjoy what's going on is part of the fun. But just everything he does is so well done that it's hard not to enjoy it on that merit alone. And it's rare for me to say that, like, forget the story, like, just enjoy how well it's made. Like, I'm not one to say that.
I love movies about people who just do their job really well, especially if it's a job I know nothing about. Like, I don't know anything about the fashion industry in 1960s London, but the movie does such a good job with the details where I'm just like enthralled of them making a dress, which I've never thought I would be.
He can do that better than anyone else can make you really invested.
He definitely ramps it up. Like, whatever it is, it's just like the level keeps getting brought higher and higher.
Yeah, and that kind of with Phantom Thread, like, it goes and it gets crazy and you're like, what's going on? And then it has this shocking ending.
Yeah.
And again, this is a movie where there's actually not that much going on, but still manages to shock you.
Yeah, I like how absurd it is when it doesn't have to be. It goes to a level where you're not expecting. All right, Matt, what is your number 7?
So my number 7, being a history nerd, I love The Death of Stalin.
Oh, I was hoping this would make it.
Probably not one I thought you guys think I was going to pick, but it's got the history stuff, which I like. And I feel like maybe you'll disagree with me. There's like a touch of like Mel Brooks, that
Definitely.
how dark it is.
Yep.
That like, I absolutely love. The casting is phenomenal.
Yeah.
The like knowing the history ins and out make the joke even better. But even if you didn't know and you're just going into it blindly, you're gonna have a good time.
I agree. I love this movie.
It's so good.
It kind of came and went last year.
It did.
It came out early in 2018 and didn't get a lot of accolades.
It got lost in the shuffle.
Yeah, and Matt kind of mentioned that it helps to know the history. And I knew the very basics, but not a whole lot. I didn't know who a lot of these characters were. But just having an idea of how frightening it must have been to live in that time it really just ramps up the humor because, these, without saying anything specific, these guys are standing next to each other in this very formal thing and just insulting each other. And then you're wondering, like, what the hell is going on?
Yeah, it's very dark humor, and I love it.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
My number 7 is from 2012, another Wes Anderson movie, Moonrise Kingdom. Anyone else have that?
Nope.
Okay. I'm realizing I included a lot of coming of age movies on my top 10, or at least about adolescent children,
You're
like
really growing
teenagers.
up here, Dan.
Well, I'm kind of thinking about that. Like, why is that just random, or is that because this is the first full decade of being an adult?
It's probably like we said, Jack.
Yeah,
from
maybe
high school
I'm
to college to
reminiscing a little bit about my youth. But Wes Anderson is always one of my favorites, and I pretty much love all of his movies. But this one is actually my favorite of his. It's got all the usual ticks that Wes Anderson has. There's the colors, the stylized fonts, uses slow motion, a great cast of a lot of his regulars, including Bill Murray. And but I think this one rises above the others because it feels the most human. The characters feel a little bit more real and lived in. A lot of other Wes Anderson characters are super fun. I love them, but they kind of feel like caricatures and not necessarily people you would meet in real life.
Yeah, for sure.
I just love this movie. It's heartwarming. It's really funny. I watched it the other day just to kind of catch up on it, and all of the characters are just so fun.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to choose between this and Grand Budapest, but I agree. It's I think a little more focused on just being human and particularly growing up. But it's also, you know, it's kind of the movie that pushed Wes Anderson from being this quirky, you know, kind of indie director to being a much bigger mainstream event, you know.
And as you're saying that, it is more realistic now that I'm thinking about it, as opposed to Grand Budapest. Grand Budapest is a lot more off the rails, but like you said, it was my first one where I was like, oh, you know, this seems a little more rooted in reality, which I was on board for and absolutely loved it. So like at that point, I'd already accepted him into my life, and so when Grand Budapest came around, I was even more thrilled.
All right, let's move on to number 6.
Okay, so my number 6 comes from some of my favorite directors, and by saying directors, you might have an idea, but it's Inside Llewyn Davis.
All right. There's some overlap. I have that one on my list too.
Yeah, where do you have that one?
I have it at number 3. So why don't you go first, and I'll talk about it after.
So for one thing, they do such a good job with the cyclical nature of it, and really the movie goes nowhere. You watch him plod along trying to get somewhere and ends up literally exactly where he started. With that, you have an absolutely amazing soundtrack. Oscar Isaac is brilliant. Carey Mulligan's great. And you get a lot of the good Coen brothers, you know, ticks that always kind of sell Coen brothers movies for me. But it all just came to a head with Inside Llewyn Davis.
I have to sort of jump in before Dan agrees with you on how perfect this movie is. Something that you just brought up about how like the plot doesn't really go anywhere. And that's why I do not like this movie. I saw it in theaters. I think I know Tom was with me for sure seeing it. And I watched it, and it's just this guy moping around for a whole movie. And spoiler alert, nothing happens at the end. And I was just very upset about that because I love the time period. I love the music. But, you know, and I just said I'll enjoy it if it's really well done. In this case and scenario, I really cared about the main character. And so to have it have no payoff whatsoever really hurt me. The only character that I enjoyed but didn't care anything about him was John Goodman. But he's his own special animal. But yeah, I am not a fan of this movie. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Dan?
I think that's totally fair what you think about that. I would almost agree. My first watch, I think, have you only watched it once?
I watched it once in theaters and then about half of it when my wife watched it.
Okay. It is a tough first watch. And I think a lot of Coen Brothers movies are tough first watches. You don't pick up on a lot of the story and the themes. And for me, I watched it and thought it was good. I loved the music, but I didn't love the movie that much. But the nice thing is the music is so good that I kept listening to the soundtrack.
Yeah.
And over time, I'm like, I should revisit that. And I ended up watching it. I've probably seen it about 7 times since then, and I agree with Tom. This is a perfect movie. The plot goes in some strange directions. Llewyn Davis, the character, you obviously root for him. You want him to succeed, but he's not a great person.
No, he's actually an asshole.
Yeah, exactly. But I would say that character is just quintessential Coen Brothers. He's he's talented, he's flawed, but he's persistent. But ultimately, he's a slave to his own fate. No matter how hard he tries, he's not going to get there. And there are just so many good scenes and characters that show up. This is one of the first times I ever saw Adam Driver in a movie.
Yeah.
And he has an amazing short little role. And I was like, who's that guy? And he's done all right for himself.
Yeah.
There's also one scene in particular that I find just like so soul crushingly effective. It's when he auditions for F. Murray Abraham's character in Chicago. And he gives like the performance of a lifetime. And in any other movie, this would be the big break. This would be the climax. But it's a Coen Brothers movie, and something else happens. I'm not going to say.
And it's like a slightly like Sisyphus situation here, where like you watch him roll this boulder up, and then it just rolls back down. And there's something. It's horrible, but at the same time, there is something really rewarding to know that he's just going to start rolling it back up. And you know that's maybe goofy, but
I don't know if he is. For all we know, he could have just ended it in the bathroom that next day, and that would have been a better ending because it's like, well, he gave up. Good, fine. Not just, and then he just kept living.
Okay, well, that's our first disagreement on this list, and that's totally fair. Matt, I would just say, watch it again sometime. You never know.
I'm always open.
Do what you want.
All right, Matt, what number are we on? 6? You're number 6.
Number 6. This is one I think will probably surprise you that I have on my list.
Okay.
And it's basically solely on my list for the main performance in the movie.
Okay.
And that would be the performance of Brie Larson in Room.
Oh, wow.
So I know it's not one that you were probably expecting.
No.
You're laughing. Do you hate it? Does this have made a huge mistake?
No, I don't hate the movie. It's okay.
I mean,
For me, it's a plane movie. It's something you watch on the plane, and it's kind of fun.
So I
Not fun, but you know what I mean.
When you said plane movie, I thought you were going to say what one of my points is that it's almost like a play, which usually I'm not a fan of. But the fact that it all takes place in the one room and so much is acted through just the mother and son being in the one room was special to me. I also had incredibly low expectations going into it. So to see that performance in that space, if you will, really is stuck with me even still.
And it's funny because Brie Larson is really incredible in it, and I knew that you had a very strong love for it, and I do like it. I think it's slightly better than being categorized as a plane movie, but
yeah, it's not that bad.
Yeah, no, I do think it is a very good movie.
I would say I think the first half is good when they were in the room. The second half of the movie, while I get why the story went there,
right.
I don't love watching as much.
It's the logical ending,
yeah,
and that's why, much like Inside Llewyn Davis, it's like maybe not the ending you wanted, but like that makes the most sense.
I'll give it to you since I spouted all my Inside Llewyn Davis crap.
No, you got it.
All right, my number 6 one. I think there might be overlap on this one, but we'll see. It's the only movie I included from 2019, and that is Parasite.
Yep, I had Parasite at number 4.
Okay.
And I haven't seen it, so I'm going to shut up.
All right. It is by director Bong Joon-ho, a director I've admired for a long time, but I haven't loved all of his movies. Mm-hmm. But this one is his masterpiece. I love this movie. It's a movie about class that isn't exactly subtle, but it also just feels natural and doesn't hit you over the head with its message, which I think is a huge compliment to it. It's about two families, one rich and one poor, but it doesn't take a side between them. You really identify with both of them and sympathize with them. It's a very ambitious film, and there have been a lot of ambitious films this decade, but I don't think any of them execute their ideas as well as Parasite does. Everything that it tries to do, it does and succeeds. On top of that, for having such a serious subject matter and context for the movie, it's wildly entertaining and also very funny.
Yeah.
Which I did not expect at all. Even when things start to take a turn and it kind of almost turns into horror, I was just so engrossed in what was happening. And that's a credit to the story structure and the characters and also the editing. The editing in this is so precise and good. This is the one movie on my list that I've only seen one time because it just came out. So I'm curious to see if I see it again. Maybe this moves up even higher. But for now, it's at 6.
Especially for something like this, where a lot of what makes it exciting is not knowing where it's going, because it's full of twists and turns. You have no idea what's going on. But people love to say about movies that they didn't waste a single second, but they really didn't waste a single second. It's just so tight, and you watch it unfold and you can't stop, and it's over and you just want to watch it again immediately, and that it gave me such a strong reaction that it really is special.
Okay, so we're halfway through, although we've had some overlap, so we're not a little more than halfway through our list. But Tom, number 5.
Number 5, I was curious to see if this showed up for either of you. I have Roma by Cuarón.
This was a tough one. This was one that was in my 10. I left it off for Sing Street, even though I recognize Roma is a technical masterpiece, and I actually really loved Roma.
I could see that painting you from across the table.
It was.
I had to let that one go.
It did, yeah. It was tough.
So Roma, is a very personal film for Cuarón, and you watch it unfold, in the story of this housekeeper. And we don't typically think of the racial difference in Mexico. I don't think of the difference between light skin and dark skin Mexicans, but it's crazy that this is something I wasn't even aware of. And then you have, the class differences, and there's also this legitimate love between the children and their, housekeeper, their maid. And it also is just heartbreaking to see how they treat her, because on one side they love her as family, on the other side she is the help.
For me, that whole movie, my favorite part of the entire thing was just the black and white, crisp cinematography of it.
One of the things I really loved about it is that it feels like an old epic. It feels like it's this sprawling thing and that you are watching, and it becomes not just a movie, but an actual event that you're watching unfold over years.
The middle section, especially the part where they go over the holidays, they go to that bigger house and there's a fire. It reminded me so much of a Fellini movie.
Yeah, I definitely think this is one of the best looking films of the past decade.
Definitely.
For sure.
It really pained me to leave it off the list. And if you asked me tomorrow to make my list again, I'd probably include it. Who knows? It's so good. All right, Matt, your number 5?
My number 5, I would be surprised if you guys don't have it on your list because I feel like it was one we always talked about really enjoying. And that is Baby Driver.
It is not on my list.
Tom?
Baby Driver is at number 14 for me. Sorry.
Oh.
Matt, only one. Take it away.
Way to deke me on like that it was going to be on your list. 14. Yeah, I mean, I absolutely loved it. Talk about having music and the scenes blending beautifully. I mean, it's got an amazing soundtrack. His work with the soundtrack is like, I still think about some of the scenes and how well he incorporated the music to the scenes. I absolutely love the movie. The casting's great. Some of the casting hasn't aged great, but the casting for the characters that are playing is right on point. And I especially loved the random cameo by Paul Williams.
Of course, yeah.
Edgar Wright is one of my favorite directors, and
that's why I thought he'd be on here.
I mean, we'll talk about honorable mentions later, but he is 3 films in my top 15 and 0 in my top 10.
Ooh, that's
so
tough.
his greatest strength is just how precise he is, and with something like Baby Driver where you're syncing every little thing up, it's just you see that precision and you hear that precision, and beyond that, he's terribly clever.
It's the precision we were talking about with Paul Thomas Anderson, but at least it's fun.
Yeah.
That's the great thing about it.
I love Edgar Wright too. I like Baby Driver. I think it's probably his worst film for me.
Oh.
I rewatched it recently. I still love it. And the music is so good and the editing is so tight. The plot for me isn't my favorite when you rewatch it and you kind of start dissecting a little bit.
It's just a classic heist, but
It is.
done so well and different, I thought.
It is, but I think other Edgar Wright movies really reward the rewatch. This one, I feel like the more I watch, the less I actually
Not
like
to
it.
call you out, but just out of curiosity, outside of his trilogy, if you will, what is a movie that you hold up?
I mean, he only has one other one,
Yeah.
Scott Pilgrim, which is I also really love.
Yeah.
My number 5 is 2017, Get Out. Any overlap there?
This was really close.
Okay.
It did not get in.
I figured it wouldn't be for Matt. There's not a lot to say that hasn't already been said about Get Out. When it came out a few years ago, there were so many essays and think pieces and overanalyzation that was a part of it. It honestly might be the most talked about movie of the decade. Besides maybe Last Jedi, but that's for a different reason. But just in terms of analyzing a movie and talking about themes, and it was a huge conversation piece in 2017, which is pretty incredible because it was a very small budget horror film from a first-time director, Jordan Peele, who was probably best known for sketch comedy.
Right,
That's
exactly.
not the jump you think they would take.
That's definitely, I think, probably the most special that he came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see where he goes going forward because he definitely knows what he's doing.
Definitely.
I think my big negative with that movie, not to take away, from it being so high on the list, but some of the things that people really enjoyed, and maybe I'm wrong in saying this, but it's in no way subtle. And it gets to the point where you're like, I get it.
Right. So I would agree with that. There's some stuff that obviously is not, but
Right.
there's some stuff underneath that is fun to talk about. And I think what it's saying about racism in this so-called post-race era, this is the end of the Obama era, an interesting time in our country. This is just a really unique, entertaining movie. There are so many scenes that are already iconic and, everyone knows, the sunken place is such a thing people know now. The Lakeith Stanfield scene where he yells, "Get out," and "Give me those keys, Rose." Like those are just iconic moments of the decade that people will remember. And the ending for me just works so well as both commentary on our country, but also just like this ultimate release from all the tension that it builds. It's just a film that will forever define the decade for me, and I still stand by it.
It was really impossible to escape it.
I always like to give it a lot more time before being like, this is what it is of the decade. And like, this is a movie I really want to keep an eye on to see how does it age historically for film. Because yes, it does point out a lot of things, but for me, like, it's weird to say, but it's like some of it was just like so obvious where it's like, I would have preferred it if it was more subtle and like that was sort of the humor, like get what he's doing, as opposed to like just over and over and over again. Like, I get it.
Sure. That's totally fair. I still stand by it. All right. We're on to number 4. And we've got some overlap here. So if you've already done your 4, let me know.
Yeah, my 4 was Parasite.
Okay.
No.
Matt?
No, there's no overlap. Okay. until we get to Grand Budapest, which was my number 2.
Okay.
I don't think there's going to be any more overlap.
What's
Judging by how this has gone.
Okay. What's your number 4?
Number 4 is Django Unchained.
Okay. All right.
So I don't think that's in anybody's list
not,
here.
but
No.
Not opposed.
Quentin Tarantino, it's my favorite movie he's ever done.
Interesting.
Wow.
Yeah, I will say that. And it kind of piggybacking a little bit off of Baby Driver. it's not so much how he uses the music in the scenes, like where it matches, it's the juxtaposition. These songs from like the 70s set to, Moving Me Down the Highway is a scene I think of all the time with the white snow. Like,
that's so good.
That is so perfect. And to have seen that in the theater, which I did, it's like one of my favorite experiences like that I can think of. But also to talk about the music just for a second, I love that he kept the main theme from the original movie and he took it a completely different way. Also, especially, mentioning the history. Nobody talks about the South during the West, like terrible things. Like when you think of a cowboy movie, it's like you do know at the same time, like terrible things are happening. And this is like really the only Western I can think of that tackles that subject. It was a bold choice, and I think it worked really well. Everyone, the casting, Christopher Waltz, Jamie Foxx, everyone does an amazing job.
I like Django Unchained. I think it's weaker than a lot of his other. I honestly prefer this year's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood to Django Unchained.
See, I need to give that more time.
I agree. I think it's not as good for me as Inglourious Bastards and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yeah, I don't know. You do have to acknowledge that Tarantino is one of the most over-the-top people in the world.
Yes.
Okay, my number 4 is a movie I don't expect to see in a lot of people's top 10s, but it's something that I love, and we've already talked to him about him a lot. But
Can't wait.
Edgar Wright is one of my favorites, and this is The World's End from 2013.
This was just shy at number 11 for me.
The World's End is the completion of the Cornetto trilogy with Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz, and those 3 movies don't have anything to do with each other other than the fact that they're directed by Edgar Wright and they star Simon Pegg and Nick Frost. And the knock on The World's End is that it's not as funny as those first 2. And I kind of agree with that. Hot Fuzz especially is so funny. There's so many jokes and they're lightning quick. Mm-hmm. That's not to say The World's End isn't funny, because it is rather hilarious. But I think it stands taller because of the character work. Simon Pegg and Nick Frost really get to do some interesting work here. Simon Pegg especially gives a really good performance here. It's another film on my list about growing up, but instead of teenagers, this is about adult friendships and how they can change over time. On top of all of that, though, you just get a really fun buddy hangout movie that kind of morphs into something completely different, but still has like this awesome energy. And it's another Edgar Wright parody of a genre that also happens to be a really good version of that genre. Like Shaun of the Dead is a send-up of zombie movies, but it's also a very good zombie movie. This is a send-up of a certain type of movie as well, but it's also really well done. It also rewards the rewatch a lot. I wasn't as excited about this movie after I first saw it. I think I saw it with you, Tom. I've probably rewatched this 10 times since, and it just gets better and better.
Yeah, and that's, you and I both really love Hot Fuzz, and, we saw that back in high school and stuff, and that was a huge, huge movie for us, but it kind of the same thing. At first I thought, no, it's not quite as good. And it really became the star of the trilogy.
It was your guys' love for it that really got me interested. And I honestly prefer the other 2. I do think it's the weakest.
I think you're with the majority on that.
I would say, yeah, as like the average American moviegoer, I'm sure they looked at it and went, what the heck is that? There is the buddy-buddy sort of relationship, but I get enough of that in the other 2 movies that it's like, that was great. But this was, I don't know, it was asking a lot for what it was, I thought.
This one does have the benefit of a great Pierce Brosnan casting.
Yeah, the support cast in this is so good. Martin Freeman.
I don't remember that. I don't know why. I think
we're due for a rewatch.
Yeah.
All right, we're down to our top 3. Tom, your number 3?
So this is one I expected to see on your list, maybe not so much Matt's, but I have Mad Max Fury Road.
It is on mine. That's now number 2.
So I don't think anyone ever could have predicted that George Miller would come back and make a new, movie in his Mad Max series, and it would become the greatest action movie. I was about to say of all time, and I thought that might be a bit extreme, but I actually don't know if it is extreme.
It might not be.
It's a bit extreme.
For sure of the decade, though. I think that's...
Of the decade,
we can agree on that.
Yeah, but again, I don't think it's actually that extreme to say of all time, because it is just so balls to the wall, like frantic, and I mean... You have a dude chained to the top of a giant rig playing a flamethrower guitar. Like, nothing else matters. George Miller's practical effects are the reason that we should do practical effects, because they look absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I would say, this movie should have been terrible. The Mad Max trilogy... it's beloved by some. I wouldn't say it's, that
it's a cult.
It's a cult movie.
It's a cult.
Yeah. And it definitely kind of sputtered out towards the end. Like,
sure.
This wasn't a movie that was like ramping up for this big reboot. This movie should have been bad. And somehow it's the greatest movie ever. I don't know. It's a great example of show, don't tell. Like the first, they could have spent the first hour with all this exposition and backstory of how we got to this point, how it connects to the last movie. Here are some characters that you might remember, but here's some new characters. It literally just drops you in.
Yeah.
There's no wait. There's an action sequence right away, and you're in it for the whole run.
There's no world building or anything like that.
It
does a little, but not.
Well, it world builds not through dialogue, but through production design and
showing,
costume.
like you said.
Exactly.
There's one shot in particular. It's just like a background thing, but they're going through and you see these people walking on stilts in the swamp, and that to me is like the perfect type of world building because you're like.
You want to know more.
Yeah, what is going on? Like, why do they need to do that? Why are they doing that? It's wonderful.
The score by Junkie XL is like this beautiful blend of like techno and orchestral opera.
Yeah.
Just really sets the stage. The way it promotes its female characters, I think, is pretty groundbreaking. Furiosa is a pretty iconic character for this decade, I would say. But ultimately, it's just pure adrenaline and one of my favorite theater experiences I've had this decade.
I think for effects and costumes and sort of the whole look of it, I really do like. I think it's probably the best of the decade for effects. But I don't know if I would say all-time action movie. I'm hesitant to say that. The historian in me is like, I got to give it a little more time. Yeah. I did have a great time, though.
Okay. So that was your number 3. Matt, what is your number 3?
My number 3 is Inside Out.
Okay.
Which I don't think is going to be on your list.
No, I would kind of wish it was because I'd like to have an animated movie on there. But
the fact you guys, do you have any animated movies on there?
I don't.
I do not, but Inside Out was the closest I came.
Inside Out, for me, it's an absolutely unique idea. Nobody saw it coming.
Directed by Pete Docter from our hometown of Bloomington, Minnesota.
Yeah, went to the same high school as me.
Yep.
Humble brag. But yeah, he's our hometown hero, and it's a great movie. I know when it comes to his movies, I like Up a lot, but the ending didn't work for me. But I think Inside Out, all the way through, is just a fantastic movie. I was not expecting that, and its uniqueness is what sells it.
Yeah, it's probably my favorite Pixar movie of the decade, other than Coco. Coco's up there for me too.
That is close as well.
But it is so unique and also like very helpful in terms of understanding like children's emotions, which is kind of cool. It's very bold.
Yeah, that's actually one of the reasons I like it is because it feels like an adult looking at how a child feels as an adult rather than as a child.
I also we watched it together, the three of us, and I'll never forget, we're in a theater, and I think we were the oldest people in the theater, hands down, and it gets to a joke in the movie that, spoiler alert if you haven't seen it by this point, they do a Chinatown joke, and the three of us laughed so loud, everyone in the theater was looking at us. It was a great time.
It's still a great joke.
It is.
I watched it recently on a plane as I rewatched and laughed at that part pretty loud.
One of Dan's plane movies.
My number 3 was Inside Llewyn Davis, so we'll skip that. Tom, your number 2?
So my number 2 is Her by Spike Jonze.
This was one that just missed my list too.
I thought you would have done this one.
Yeah, and this feels like one of those movies that is perfectly tailored to me. It's weird and quirky, but it's also just like, it's a bit of like sad dude.
You're not sad.
No, I'm not saying I'm sad, but I just, like I like that. I like a lot of those movies. It's a genre that for some reason just really resonates with me. I enjoy it, but a lot of the world building in it is really subtle, and that's what makes it really interesting to me. You have these futuristic ideas that really are not so far off. You have this AI that become sentient and learns and loves and stuff, and it's really interesting to see because it's like, okay, what happens or how do relationships evolve in the 21st century?
What year did that come out?
It was 2013.
2013, yeah.
Well, just crazy to see that and then compare it to Black Mirror. Like, it's essentially a Black Mirror episode titled like Sexy Siri.
The difference though is that you have Black Mirror and it tries to kind of shock and awe you with these ideas, but really it's kind of background here to this really beautiful story about falling in and out of love and kind of growing through love and overcoming different challenges. This is probably weird to say, but I think it has the best sex scene I've ever seen in a movie because the screen's entirely black. It's just so wonderfully personal. And Joaquin Phoenix is always a star, but
Scarlett Johansson is really
this probably my favorite performance of hers. It's just such a beautiful movie.
Yeah, I love it too. I love the world building in it. It never says what year it is, but you can tell it's a little further off in the future just because things feel a little bit off, but it still feels like a natural progression of where we'd go.
Well, my number 2 is the Grand Budapest Hotel,
Okay,
so we don't really have to go over
And my
that
number
again.
2 is Mad Max.
You're welcome, both of you.
So we're on to our number 1. Before we get to number 1, though, let's just kind of run through our honorable mentions that didn't quite make it, if you want to just do a quick little rundown.
So I kind of mentioned Edgar Wright, World's End, Baby Driver, and Scott Pilgrim at 11, 14, and 15. Swiss Army Man I have at 17. And that's one that is just so stupid and bizarre and not even one that I can like recommend to everyone. But for some reason, I just absolutely love it. And then Kubo and the Two Strings by Leica Studios.
You love that.
When I saw that, I reacted probably much more strongly than I should have. But yeah, those are my honorable mentions.
Some ones from me, Annihilation from last year.
Yeah.
Her, we just mentioned. Whiplash from 2014,
Yep.
Damien Chazelle, I really love. Scott Pilgrim, Nightcrawler. I love Nightcrawler with Jake Gyllenhaal. Cavalry, which is a smaller indie movie from Ireland. Carol, I love Carol, and that almost made my list.
I'm surprised you didn't have that one on.
Yeah, Roma we mentioned, Dunkirk we mentioned, also Phoenix from 2014.
Yeah, Phoenix is my top 20, I think.
Okay, I really like Phoenix.
That was one of those when we're talking about 2015, seeing a movie I wouldn't normally have seen. And I, as much as I enjoyed it, I wouldn't put it on any of my lists.
Sure.
Another one I wanted to point out was Minding the Gap, which is the
Oh,
only
yeah.
documentary I have in my top 50.
Yeah, that's
and
definitely mine too.
That is a devastating film. Definitely recommend that.
Matt, any honorable mentions for you?
For me, some ones that were kind of on the cusp, kind of ones that like people didn't necessarily talk about. One for sure that I know nobody talked about was called The Look of Love with Steve Coogan.
I did not see it.
If you get a chance, definitely, it's an interesting story. There's also a movie from Mexico called El Narco you should take a look at for movies from Mexico that aren't Roma. It's a very good one. Also wanted to mention The Witch.
Yep.
Talking about unique horror films to come into play.
Robert Eggers. And The Lighthouse as well.
Yeah, that's something we'll touch on a bit later, but
Oh, yeah.
both really fantastic.
I was a big fan of Kong, oddly enough.
Kong Skull Island?
Yeah, Kong
Okay.
Skull. Talk about a movie that shouldn't have worked, but I was like, you know what? Not terrible.
It didn't really work.
Does it work? Yeah.
I mean, it's nowhere near my top 10, but I will
Okay.
say, considering having to relaunch King Kong and then potentially putting it in the Godzilla
Yeah,
ones,
okay.
I don't mean to completely shoot myself in the foot with that. Also really liked Black Swan. I almost had
Yeah.
that as my unique horror, but settled on Hereditary.
Black Swan is one from 2010, which it feels so long ago.
Yeah,
It does.
I haven't seen it since I first saw it.
Then lastly, just touching back to documentaries, one that I highly recommend because I think it's still on Netflix, is Five Came Back.
Yeah.
It's really good.
Okay. Well, moment of we've all been waiting for, our top movie of the decade. So, Tom, you are first. Make your case.
Tree of Life by Terrence Malick is my favorite film of the decade and probably pretty close to being top of all time. It is just it's so hard to talk about. It's so beautiful.
This might be my biggest cinematic blind spot. I have not seen this movie, even though everything about it I know I would love it.
But it is, I mean, first off, this really heartbreaking and beautiful story about this family, and you have this child trying to make sense of things, particularly with his father, who is who loves him very much, but who's also a very difficult person to be with and difficult person to love. And it's all very non-linear. There's literally sequences about the creation of the universe, and there's a dinosaur in it, and it's not something that most people probably are used to seeing. I actually worked at Blockbuster when this came out, and that's where I saw it. And a lot of people who rented it hated it, and they tell me that, and I remember this specifically. This one woman talking about it and just how much she loved it, and she mentioned that it probably makes a bigger impact once you have kids. And I don't have kids yet, but I can absolutely see that. But even without that, like just on family relationships and loss and love, and even remembering your childhood and how things are kind of hazy. The whole thing plays like someone. I mean, it is literally someone, Sean Penn, remembering his childhood. So it just has this ethereal quality to it, and it is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen.
Matt, you're number one.
Wow. Okay, so I don't think you're going to agree with me. I don't think anyone's going to agree with me.
I love it already.
But I'm going solely based off the fact that it is like a huge, to me, I think for film history, it's going to leave a mark for a long time. So I went with Infinity War Endgame.
Avengers?
Avengers Endgame.
Okay.
Yes.
This is 100% what I expected to be your top spot.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised it wasn't the original Avengers, because that was more of like the kickoff moment. But I see where you're going.
That's
with this.
fair. And if you look at my list, I think where I just have the MCU ranked, I do have Avengers ahead of it. But the fact that this just came out and it's the end, I'm using it to encompass them all, if you will. So I do think, pound for pound, yes, I would pick the Avengers over Endgame, but it deserves to be like sort of the benchmark of these movies for the whole decade, and to have it all be wrapped up as neatly as it did. I'm not saying it's perfect by any means, but I don't think it could ever be done again. It's insane how it all came together with this cast, everyone in it. It's insane.
I do think it's important to note that between Marvel, Star Wars, and Game of Thrones, this was the only one to nail the ending.
Yeah, absolutely. And like that's special within itself. It'll be interesting to see as the years go by, but I don't think you can ever take away what they were able to pull off.
Yeah, definitely.
In those years. And like that's what deserves sort of its recognition to be number one, I feel.
No, honestly, I'd be mad if you didn't pick one of those Avengers movies. That's your number one.
It had to be, especially with the first Avengers, as much as I love it, because that was technically the first team up. The movies leading up to it were very like, let's get them in there for the team up, as opposed to once we have them and we have the Avengers under their belt, they got a little bit better. Like most people that don't like the first movies really enjoy like Captain America's second film or like the third Thor. So like letting the characters grow and then nail the ending. Like that's why I think at the end it should be the marker.
That's fair.
I also want to point out that Matt and I rewatched the entire MCU with some friends leading up to Endgame. And
I joined for a few.
Yeah, Dan was there for a few. For the ones he likes.
The good ones.
Yeah, he's not in for commitment. But with that, Endgame really does become, and like you can accuse it of just being fan service because it is, but it also is legitimately satisfying.
Okay, I think though you two probably know what's coming for my number one, and anyone who talks with me about movies probably saw this one coming, but it is
Bohemian Rhapsody.
That was close. No, this is The Social Network from 2010.
Yeah.
Directed by David Fincher. It is the perfect harmony between one of our greatest screenwriters in Aaron Sorkin and one of the greatest directors, David Fincher. They're both great on their own, but they just elevate each other so well here. It's a 2-hour movie that just zips along so fast as it crosscuts between timelines and lawsuits and characters. It's famously a super long script that Aaron Sorkin actually had to record himself reading the lines to show Fincher how fast the dialogue had to go in the scenes, because it zips along so quickly, and it's just one thing building off another. It's another movie filled with iconic scenes. The opening dialogue between Jesse Eisenberg as Mark Zuckerberg and Rooney Mara is so good. Sean Parker's introduction, the regatta boat race.
The regatta scene is absolutely
like that's a masterclass in filmmaking right there. The confrontation with Andrew Garfield at the end is that's so good. I can watch those scenes all the time, and I do on YouTube. I'll pull them up sometimes and watch them. It also introduced a ton of acting talent. Jesse Eisenberg was kind of more or less well known by that point, but Armie Hammer, Rooney Mara,
the Hammer twins, you mean, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Andrew Garfield, Dakota Johnson are all in this movie, and they were pretty much all unknowns at that time. Even Justin Timberlake as an actor was kind of an unknown quantity.
Yeah, it was a bit almost stunt casting.
It was, but it totally works.
Yeah,
he gets so immersed in that character.
I didn't think he'd be able to play a douchebag.
When it came out 10 years ago almost, it felt so modern and new, and it still feels that way. It's something about the dialogue and the style of it just feels very new and modern, and part of that is also the Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross score, which is now kind of iconic, and they've been used. Those two have been scoring movies since then, but at the time that was a new kind of sound that you don't get in a movie score. The funny thing about this movie is how it's actually aged and what our perception of Facebook is and how that's changed over the 10 years. In 2010, Facebook was huge, but it was still kind of hip and growing. This is before the rise of Instagram and Twitter and Snapchat and
it
Facebook.
Was the only player in town.
It really was. And I remember people were legitimately mad about this movie when it came out because they took some liberties. People were really mad at how mean and vindictive it made Mark Zuckerberg look, and there was all this publicity about don't watch this movie because it's not the truth, because Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook are actually a really good company. That has not aged well.
Well, yeah, with hindsight, I was going to say, who gives a shit about this guy?
Right. But I think, the last decade has kind of shown Facebook's true colors, especially with some of the Cambridge Analytica stuff and the 2016 election. It's ultimately, I think, made the movie more relevant. As you watch the movie today, you see these Harvard guys create The Social Network under some kind of nefarious motives.
Right.
And it's all too easy to make that connection to see where that company went.
The evil of it.
So that's just, it's operating at a whole new level for me in terms of, the modern take on it.
So just trying to talk it down, did you have something else that you wanted to say beyond that?
No, I think it's a ridiculously entertaining movie. It's something I can rewatch anytime, but it's also a really good commentary about our need for social interaction and the way that social media in this decade is just kind of taken over our lives.
I don't know. I guess the entertainment comes from like how painful it is. I don't know if I would say it's like an entertaining. Like I don't enjoy.
I think the dialogue is so entertaining and the scenes are so good.
I won't argue with you. Like the script is absolutely fantastic, and David Fincher, I love with his movies. I feel like he's better at setting the tone. Like everything, the tone is like perfect for what the scene is. So when you have a script that's that amazing, he sets the tone perfectly. And so my interpretation of it was great direction, great script, great acting, but like I don't know if I like watching about this douchey guy that started Facebook, because like maybe that's what the mindset of now, knowing who he is.
Like I said, for a lot of these movies, watch it again. You never know. So that's our top 10. I think that's a pretty good overall list. We didn't have a lot of foreign films in there besides Roma, but that is what it is. Parasite, you're right. We all three rate our movies on Letterboxd and IMDb, and I meticulously gather all of our ratings.
He's a stat nerd.
I am.
Get this man a spreadsheet.
Between the three of us, there are 270 movies where all three of us have all seen and rated.
Wow.
I've compiled just the average rating of those movies, and here are our top 5 in terms of the average overall rating, which is, it actually differs a little bit from our top 10. So here's the top 5. Actually, I'll do top 10. We have top 10 here. Number 10 is Spotlight. We didn't mention Spotlight.
So Spotlight's one of those ones where when you first saw it, I had it at the best of the year for that year, and you kind of forget about it, and then you think, you know what? It was really good. I don't care.
Sure, I would agree with that.
Which is too bad considering the subject material, but
Number 9, we have Grand Budapest Hotel. We talked about that. 8 is Her. 7 is Avengers Endgame. 6, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
Wow, there it is.
Number 5 is The Irishman. We didn't talk about The Irishman. It just came out. We did see it. So that could potentially grow on our list over time. Number 4 is The Social Network. I'll have you know. Number 3, Inside Out. Number 2, Mad Max Fury Road. And number 1 is Roma.
Oh, that's surprising.
Yeah. I don't think it is surprising.
Okay.
Here are our bottom 10.
Ooh.
We didn't talk about bad movies of the decade.
10 being the worst or 1 being the worst?
We'll start with 1 being the worst. I'll start from 10. We'll go down to the worst. These aren't necessarily the worst movies we've seen this decade, because typically when they're bad, we don't always see them, or only one person will see them.
Yeah.
Me.
Exactly.
I know.
As long as you know.
I know.
Yeah.
Okay, so here are our top 10 worst of the decade, according to us. Number 10, Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice.
Yep.
Oh, what a nightmare.
Number 9, Iron Sky.
Oh.
Well, at least Iron Sky knows what it is.
It's true.
Versus like Batman v Superman, like that.
Right.
Oof.
Number 8, Bohemian Rhapsody.
Oh.
Yeah, that's a horrific movie.
I think you hate that the most.
That's probably another topic for a different day.
That's
Number 7, Alice in Wonderland, the Tim Burton remake.
Ugh.
Interesting that it is that low.
I didn't like it at all.
I mean, it's not good.
Number 6, Suicide Squad.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's garbage.
Number 5, maybe controversial, The Babysitter.
There it is.
We're not going to talk about that today.
That's a 2-on-1 scenario is what that is.
Number 4, 30 Minutes or Less. A movie that I kind of forgot about.
It's super short.
It's
a good cast that you would care about.
It is.
It's just very forgettable.
I don't remember what I rated that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Number 3 is Pan.
Yeah.
The Peter Pan remake.
I hated that.
Yep. Number 2, The Perfection. I know Matt did not like that one.
I'm glad that's where it should be.
That's mid-tier.
Our worst movie of the decade, according to us, a lot of people might disagree with this, but it is Southpaw. The Jake Gyllenhaal boxing movie.
No, I'll back that forever. That is a terrible Lifetime movie
It is.
that involves, fighting that happens out of Jake Gyllenhaal.
It's unfortunate that my boyfriend Jake Gyllenhaal did such a bad movie.
It says a lot because you guys love Jake Gyllenhaal.
We do.
I'm indifferent, but the fact that you would join me in hating this movie makes me feel even more special.
Yeah, we kind of talked about it when you mentioned Creed, but I just don't like boxing. Like
Well,
I don't.
It's not. I think it's UFC is what it technically is.
Well,
A lot
I
of
know.
people
I think it is boxing.
I just don't like watching dudes. I mean, even in real life, I don't
was
like watching
terrible.
dudes fight.
All right, we're going to move on to our couple additional categories here that I've compiled just so we close up this podcast. Oscar Best Picture winners. We don't have the Best Picture winner from 2019 yet, so there's only 9 of them from this decade. But I'm going to read them off to you. I want you to tell me which win aged the worst and which is the best. Okay. So we have The King's Speech.
I think that's perfectly fine.
It beat out The Social Network, so I'm going to disagree with that.
Well, I mean,
I think the King's Speech is problematic only because of what Tom Hooper has done since.
Yeah, Cats has not helped him out on that. 2011, The Artist, which is a fine film. I don't think it's very memorable.
that was Hollywood loving Hollywood.
Exactly.
In its purest form.
It's enjoyable, but yeah, you're like
2012, Argo. Argo's a fun time.
It was okay.
it's fine.
2013, 12 Years a Slave, a very
Very
well executed film.
That's one that is incredibly good, but incredibly hard to watch.
Yep.
That's when you're Manchester by the Seas.
Right. 2014, Birdman.
Yeah.
Tom
Well,
agree with that
you know
one.
how I feel about it.
Yep. 2015, Spotlight, we just mentioned. 2016, Moonlight, we kind of talked about a little bit.
Yep.
Moonlight should have won.
Nope. Wait. Yes, it should have. Yes. Thank you. Sorry.
2017, The Shape of Water.
that
And
was a curveball.
So
it was.
with that, Pan's Labyrinth by Del Toro is my favorite movie, and Shape of Water is fine. It's okay. It's a little bit of a letdown that he won for that.
Yeah.
I think they felt bad.
Shape of Water also beat out Get Out and Dunkirk, which I think are just much better films.
Yeah, agreed.
And then finally last year we had Green Book.
Oof.
Oh, that's the worst. That's
Makes
the
me
worst
want to eat
one.
a whole pizza.
But fold it in half.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I would say of those 9, they're not great.
No.
Green Book I think is the worst, but I would say King's Speech and The Artist are also not great picks.
I mean, I would pick King's Speech over The Artist for sure.
I think that
I just think they're not very memorable overall. Even like Spotlight, which I think is a really good movie, and I was very happy with that win at the time. You know, when you look back at 2015, Mad Max was that year. Like that probably should have won.
Right.
yeah, I don't know. I think Birdman and Moonlight are the ones that really deserved it. 12 Years a Slave.
12 Years a Slave is probably the one I back the most of
Yeah.
all those.
All right. Okay, here's a kind of a fun one. I'm going to read off a bunch of nominees for this one. Which director had the best decade? Okay. And the criteria for this is they have to have had 3 films in the decade, a minimum of 3. So I'm going to read a bunch of them. Damien Chazelle, kind of a new up-and-coming director for this decade. He had Whiplash, La La Land, and First Man.
First Man for me was the only one that I really kind of liked out of them.
I seem to be in the minority that still thinks La La Land is a good movie. It is.
I like it too.
It is in my top 20,
a
but
whole
Damien
other
Chazelle had a very strong decade.
So Damien Chazelle, Wes Anderson, Moonrise Kingdom, Grand Budapest Hotel, Isle of Dogs.
You know, I know a lot of people didn't like Isle of Dogs. I thought it was okay. I don't like it as much as the other two, but
I think Isle of Dogs is pretty mediocre.
Paul Thomas Anderson, who was one of my top favorite directors of this decade. The Master, Inherent Vice, Phantom Thread.
ooh, The Master is pretty good.
So I actually don't remember The Master very well, and I wish I had been able to watch it. Inherent Vice, that was good. I didn't love it.
I did not like
I loved Inherent Vice a lot more after I read the book and kind of got more into the
Yeah,
what the story was supposed to be. David Fincher, The Social Network, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and Gone Girl.
They're all good. I don't think they're amazing.
I prefer Social Network, Girl with the
Yeah.
Dragon Tattoo. I'd rather watch the original.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair.
And yeah, so
Edgar Wright, we've talked about Scott Pilgrim versus the World, The World's End, and Baby Driver.
You all know how I feel.
yeah.
The Coen brothers had an interesting decade. True Grit was this decade. Inside Llewyn Davis, Hail Caesar, and The Ballad of Buster Scruggs.
So this one's interesting because Hail Caesar and Ballad of Buster Scruggs are ones that I think got better over time.
Yeah.
On first viewing, neither of them were amazing, but really all solid outings.
I would prefer Hail Caesar to be more like Ballad, where it was like the stories are separate, just going during that time period and how because they tried to.
It almost
just
feels
too
like
much.
that. Yeah, because there are parts of Hail Caesar that I think are better than others.
Right.
The Ray Fiennes scenes with Alden Ehrenreich are so
Oh, yeah.
good.
I want that whole movie.
Yeah.
I will say I do get No Dame stuck in my head a lot.
Richard Linklater, he did Bernie, Before Midnight, Boyhood, which he did throughout the decade, kind of. Everybody Wants Some, Last Like Flying, and Where'd You Go, Bernadette?
That's a lot of movies.
He did. He's very productive.
I haven't seen all of them.
And Bernie was with Jack Black.
Yeah,
right?
that's correct.
I loved that one.
That
That
was
was my favorite of the
shockingly
set.
good.
It
I
is really
think.
good. we'll go into my other favorite director who I did not include in my top 10, Yorgos Lanthimos. Directed Alps this decade, The Lobster, The Killing of a Sacred Deer, and The Favorite.
And Dogtooth was kind of right around.
It was 2009, so just missed
right
out.
around.
So you can't talk about it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Denis Villeneuve, Incendies, Prisoners, Enemy, Sicario, Arrival, and Blade Runner 2049.
That is a run.
That is quite the run.
He's got Dune coming up, and I'm thrilled for that.
I do want to see that.
Have you guys seen Incendies at all?
No, I haven't seen that or Enemy.
Okay.
But, the others are really solid.
Yeah, he is a very talented guy doing a lot of different kinds of movies, which I like. Christopher Nolan, Inception, which we didn't talk about at all.
Yeah.
The Dark Knight Rises, Interstellar, and Dunkirk.
Dark Knight Rises is the only real dud in there.
Yeah.
But
Even that, though, I think
It's not bad.
It's still ambitious and a lot of fun.
yeah, it's not bad. It's just compared to the others. I really love Interstellar.
Yep.
It was okay.
Noah Baumbach, Greenberg, Frances Ha, Mistress America, While We're Young, The Meyerowitz Stories, Marriage Story.
Meh.
I know Matt's feeling on that. I loved Noah Baumbach.
I really enjoy him as well.
Ryan Coogler, we talked about a little bit. Fruitvale Station, which I don't think you guys have seen,
No.
but I think is an amazing film. Creed and Black Panther.
I mean, those two alone, and then again teaming with Michael B. Jordan.
I think he's definitely one of the most exciting directors.
I mean, he maybe didn't win this decade, but I wouldn't be surprised if he won the next one.
Yeah.
Right.
Martin Scorsese, Shutter Island, Hugo, The Wolf of Wall Street, Silence, which I really love, The Irishman, not including some of his documentaries he did this decade as well. This is kind of a fun one. Adam McKay, The Other Guys, Anchorman 2, The Big Short, and Vice.
Wow.
Vice is garbage.
That's an Anchorman too.
Anchorman 2 is not great either, but The Other Guys and The Big Short are some of my favorite movies of the decade.
Yeah.
I would agree.
Other guys, at least. I don't know if Big Short is still.
I like the Big
I
Short.
like The Big Short.
I like the Big Short.
Quentin Tarantino, Django Unchained, Hateful Eight, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Great.
I'd say they're all great.
Very lush.
Hateful Eight is not my favorite.
Yeah, that one was a bit of a disappointment.
I was only sold by Hateful Eight even more so by the roadshow aspect of it, which I know that's sort of gimmicky, but like same with anyone being like, oh, I love it because it was in 3D.
Yep.
You know.
This one's a big name, not necessarily a great resume. Steven Spielberg, Adventures of Tintin, Warhorse, Lincoln, Bridge of Spies, The BFG, The Post, Ready Player One.
I mean, not the best resume for this decade, I
Sure,
suppose.
yeah.
But like even then, there's still some good.
Honestly, Adventures of Tintin is the star for this decade for me.
Really, I still think Lincoln is one of his better films.
I also never saw that.
The history nerd in me.
And Bridge of Spies it's classic.
Yeah. I mean, you got Tom Hanks, so it really can't fail.
Taika Waititi, a guy that we didn't expect coming into this decade, perhaps. He directed Boy, What We Do in the Shadows, Hunt for the Wilder People, Thor Ragnarok, and Jojo Rabbit.
Yeah, I mean, he has made his career being weird and goofy, and boy, What We Do in the Shadows, Hunt for the Wilder People, and Thor Ragnarok, I love.
So good.
Jojo Rabbit was a massive disappointment to me.
It was okay. I mean, he colors outside the lines, and it's not going to be a great drawing every time. So
The Russo brothers directed Winter Soldier, Civil War, Infinity War, and Endgame. I know how you feel about that, Matt.
pretty great.
I will say those are probably the high-end Marvel movies for sure.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then my favorite of these, Dean DeBlois, which I don't know if you know that name. He directed 3 of my favorite movies from this decade, which I have not gotten a chance to announce
The
yet.
Dan podcast now.
But he directed How to Train Your Dragon, How to Train Your Dragon 2, and How to Train Your Dragon, The Hidden World.
I've seen How to Train Your Dragon.
I have seen the first 2, and they are phenomenal.
Well,
It is maybe the best trilogy ever completed this decade.
And
Whoa. What a bold
up
statement.
there for best score.
That's true. Okay, so those are a lot of names. If you remember any of them, that's fine. But my vote for best who won the decade, I would say Denis Villeneuve, just because he put out, how many is that? 6 movies
That's a lot.
in 10 years. All of them very different. All of them original. I guess Blade Runner 2049 is a sequel, but it's very unique
still.
to that world.
He got to do whatever he wanted, essentially.
Yeah.
I've already gushed. Edgar Wright.
I'll probably have to go with the Russo brothers.
Okay, that's fair. All right, our next little fun category. If you could go back and give one movie a do-over or fix something about a movie this decade. So that could be, remaking the entire thing if you wanted to with a different director, or maybe swap out an actor or change a plot line. Any fix you want to come up with, what movie would it be?
And so is this like a dream scenario? Like I can hand pick the director for the project?
Yep.
Well, I'm going to go first because mine is the most out there.
Okay.
And it started with a movie you mentioned as one of our least favorites, which was I was thinking about Batman versus Superman. I'm like, you know what? That could have been good. I mean, you got good casting, but it was a bad cornerstone to build that house on. And as I was thinking about that, it occurred to me there's another DC movie that had high potential for me. It was a movie and a character that I cared about, but they completely messed it up. And it was in 2010, a movie called Jonah Hex.
Oh, yeah.
Which was honestly perfectly cast. You've got Josh Brolin as Jonah Hex, Megan Fox at her peak. At her peak, which I know isn't saying much, but playing like a prostitute in the Old West, what more could you ask for? You had John Malkovich, you had Michael Fassbender. Like that's a phenomenal cast for a Western that they decided to be like, let's do Wild Wild West again. It's like that's not what you should do. Like he's such a unique character, and because he proved it in Django Unchained. Imagine Quentin Tarantino getting to play with that sandbox of actors.
I like that.
And that comic book fun. Like, that could have been a series.
That would have been pretty cool. I like that idea.
Thank you.
Tom, any ideas?
So we first got this prompt. I was like, how in the hell am I going to find what? And then it just popped in my head, The Hobbit. The Hobbit is...
I thought about that too.
Because, and I am much more forgiving of The Hobbit than probably most people. Like, I think they're fine. They're not good. They're fine. And I still enjoy them because of my love for Tolkien. But keep Peter Jackson, it was cast Martin Freeman's perfect. Just give them another year or two of pre-production. Let them figure out what they're doing. Don't have it be such a mess. 3 movies is too much. Like,
just 2 would have been perfect.
2 would have been great. Just clean it up and have a plan going in, and we would have had another Lord of the Rings trilogy.
I also wish they would have shot on film.
Yeah,
the digital does not look good.
No, it does not. And they did the 48 frames per second, and that was a weird thing to do that.
Yeah, there's no reason.
Yeah.
I had that as well as one of my nominees for this. I've got 2, and they're kind of weird. The first would be, we had Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse introduced Miles Morales as a character, and it was a big hit. People really liked that storyline. There was potential to bring him in as Spider-Man in 2012 for The Amazing Spider-Man with Donald Glover. And they didn't go that route. They went with Andrew Garfield, who's a fine actor, but they basically just rehashed the previous Spider-Man plot. Those movies are terrible. They don't serve any purpose other than to keep the rights for Sony with the character.
Just wrong. It's just wrong.
So I would just imagine, like, what if they had cast Donald Glover in that role? Maybe it's a completely different storyline. Who knows? That could have been a new franchise for Spider-Man that could have been a big hit. My other random one, and you guys haven't seen this movie yet, I don't think, but it's the new Lion King.
Wow, you already want to redo on that?
Yeah, so...
Redo.
Does it need to be remade?
Well, no, not at all. But the Disney remakes of their live action remakes, their only purpose is to make money,
right?
Obviously, but I would at least like, if they're gonna remake one of their movies, it'd be great to at least have a reason for existing beyond making money,
right?
And maybe that's just changing the plot just a little bit. And Lion King is so faithful to the original Lion King, it's not fun to watch at all. But here's a interesting twist. Lions are maternal.
Oh, good Lord. This is where this is going?
I'm in.
Why not have the Lion Queen? Oh. Why not have the story centered around Nala? It could be the same story, but at least in that perspective, it's something a little bit different.
This sounds like a Disney Plus original that I wouldn't watch.
Yeah, exactly. It's dumb.
If it's anything we've learned about Disney, though, in this decade, it's that we're going to buy a bunch of stuff, and the stuff that we have, we're going to play it safe because, it's money in the bank.
Sure. Okay. My final question for you guys, as we head into the 20s, the decade of the 20s, if you could buy stock in one up-and-coming director or actor or even a writer, producer, studio, any entity in the movie business, who would it be?
Hopefully buying stock in these 20s goes better than...
Right.
Anyway, I'm going to do my quick 2, and I think there might be a slight overlap. You might have been able to tell how I was sort of gushing about them, but sort of the actor-director I would buy, not necessarily together, but, separately, would be Michael B. Jordan and Ryan Coogler. Both of them are like 33 years old, and they're going to do a lot more fantastic work. Like, that's a complete safe bet. I would also like to buy more shares of Robert Eggers because, like we said, Lighthouse and Witch, because he really researches everything he does meticulously.
Yeah, no, I have him on my list as well because he is one of the most exciting, promising up and comers, I think. So I have quite a few people here. I haven't actually seen Little Women yet, but Greta Gerwig is one to keep your eye on.
Yeah, I basically wrote down the entire cast of Little Women, including Greta Gerwig in mine.
They are bigger than you think they're going to be in that movie.
That's the third time I've heard her make that joke. Yeah, so you have her. You also have Jordan Peele, gave us Get Out and Us. Really, really cool stuff. We talked about Barry Jenkins, Ari Aster, who made Hereditary and Midsommar, Robert Eggers. I think we need to talk a little bit about the Safdie brothers, who made Good Time. We just saw Uncut Gems. Both of them are really good. I think they're both in my top 50. I think these guys have a lot of promise, and I hope that they shovel some more resources towards them. And then my last one that I have written down is Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Oh.
Because we have In the Heights coming out soon, and the hopefulness of a Hamilton movie, but you also see him doing music for things like Moana, I think we'll get a lot more of him because he's such a hot property right now.
I want to say right now, yes or no, are we going to get a Hamilton movie this upcoming decade?
I would think yes.
Yes.
I'll say no.
Okay. My stock is similar to you guys. I basically wrote down the entire cast of Little Women because they're just filled with talent, and part of that's recency bias, but Greta Gerwig especially, through 2 movies, I think she's the real deal.
That's Saoirse Ronan, I tell you.
I love her. I also think Florence Pugh.
Yeah, Florence Pugh I wrote down.
She was one of the ones.
Yep, and Timothée Chalamet, of course. I also wrote down Damien Chazelle.
Yep.
I know you feel indifferent about La La Land, but I think La La Land and First Man have proven how ambitious he really is. He's making films at a really high level right now, and I'm really curious to see what he does next. I also wrote down Ari Aster, we mentioned, and then a couple actors. Thomasin McKenzie.
Oh, yeah, she's great.
A young woman. She's up and coming. I think she's going to be the real deal. And also Glenn Powell. Do you guys know who Glenn Powell is?
What are you referencing?
Glenn Powell is an actor. He was in Everybody Wants Some. He was the very charismatic guy in Everybody Wants Some. He was also in Set It Up, the rom-com on Netflix last year.
No thanks.
He was also in Hidden Figures. He played John Glenn. He is the most charismatic, lovable actor I know right now, and he's super fun. You would recognize him once you saw him.
You brought up Everybody Wants Some, and that's kind of how I feel about Wyatt Russell.
Yeah,
exactly. I absolutely love him.
Everybody Wants Some is a lot like Dazed and Confused, where you watch Dazed and Confused now and you see how many great actors came from that movie.
Yeah.
I think Everybody Wants Some is going to be similar, and Glenn Powell is going to be the guy there's Glenn Powell when he's super young. He's the guy to buy stock in. All right. Any other final thoughts, closing thoughts on the decade, guys? Otherwise, we can wrap this up.
One thing I just want to address is a lot of people like to say that movies just aren't good anymore. And that always really irks me because I see a lot of really good movies every year, and I can find 15 movies, in a second that I say, okay, you should watch that. Mm-hmm. Movies are still good. We have a lot of big budget crap, and even as someone who really enjoys the Avengers, we get a lot of that. But we're also getting a lot of really interesting films from, unique people.
I would agree with that.
I would say going forward, it's going to change, like you said, with streaming. TV shows and movies are almost becoming the same things in terms of episodic. How is the script written? But looking back, I think it's important. Like I said, this whole list, and I can think of one right now that I'm not looking back at fondly at bringing up. But that's the thing, is that I don't know if it's had enough time to breathe. It's only been 10 years, and for me to really enjoy a movie or to think it's got the most historical significance, I think it needs more than 10 years to think about it, because you never know how things are going to age or how important that was at the time. Looking back. I don't know. I do think Avengers Endgame, though, is a good benchmark because it's all those movies. It's, like I said, the Cowboys. That's what I'm going to end on, was my argument, I suppose. Okay. Well, hopefully if you're listening and maybe you heard a recommendation for a movie you haven't seen, maybe you go watch it. If you don't like it, don't blame us. I think you're saying watch it or don't. All right, guys. Thanks for joining me. This was the Best of the Decade podcast. We'll see you soon.